Lights, camera, action. Today, we have Jeremy Dawson, producer, visual effects supervisor, visual effects artist and supervisor, and restaurateur. I have known for now, Jeremy, I think it's been 20 years or more. I think it's more.
More than 20, Charlie.
Like almost, I think it's 30. I think it's 30 years. I think we go back to when you were attending Harvard with the old crew.
Yeah, and I think actually I remember the first time I really remember talking to you is we came up to the old building on 40, or where was that?
44th Street.
44th Street, was it? But west between like 9th and 10th or 8th and 9th?
8th and 9th Avenue. That was the old Technicolor.
Yeah, and up there in the old Technicolor in a little room, it smelled like chemicals.
The best.
And I remember talking to you there, and that was probably around when we were doing, maybe it was even tests for Pi or something.
Might have been tests for Pi because they ended up using Gufani for Pi. Darren did, and we were trying to help in the after process because at the time we had for a period abandoned black and white processing. Anyway, let's flash forward. What are you up to right now? You finished French Dispatch for Wes Anderson, correct?
Yeah, that's in the can, and we finished it right around the end of the year, and we were sort of gearing up towards this glorious red carpeted Cannes, which was going to be, from the producing point of view, there's always the fun of having a premiere, but also, from the logistic point of view, I was thinking, okay, great, we're gonna have all the actors there, we can interview them, we can film them, we can get this person to do this little social media little clip that we were going to have them do. And so because you have a captive audience for a few days, and then of course like that went up in smoke with the pandemic, and our release date pushed from early summer to October 16th. And so we're now in the process of trying to gather what we need for all the marketing and release materials in new methods.
I've had a lot of discussions about these new methods with different artists. I'm going to ask you to do one thing. It's not a big deal. I didn't ask you to do it before, but if you can, I will. You have a lot of backlight. Is there any way that we can get the light on your face by turning the computer?
I will close the curtain. Hold on.
Yeah. That's okay. This is legitimate. This is a legitimate part of the podcast when we begin and trying to get things set up. So anyway, sorry for that, but we're taking a station break as Mr. Dawson.
Is that moving a little with the backlight? I can turn it a bit. The problem is I've got construction going on, so it's a bit messy here.
Yeah, that gives me more light on your face. I want to see that punim. There we go.
Okay. All right, here we go. The DP at work.
That's good. So there you go. So here we are, current moment. And your life your creative journey began on some level with the creation or the early creation, right, of what was Darren's company's Protozoa's visual effects company, Amoeba Proteus. You're one of the founding fathers, are you not?
Yeah. So basically, what happened is, first of all, we all, Darren and I and Ari Handel and Dan Schrecker all went to university together at Harvard, and we were friends, with a cool group of creative people we used to all with Sean Goulet, who was the lead actor in Pi, Colson Whitehead, the great novelist, who was a friend there and sort of part of the creative, just people we would hang out with, and when people would be doing movie, in Dan Schrecker was doing animation at Harvard, we would, you'd be there at late at night, I'd be in the dark room because I was doing a lot of photography at the time, and he'd be down the hall, drawing with ink on little film cells, and Darren was making
Schrecker was doing animation, right? He was doing animation at the Carpenter Center.
Yeah, he was doing animation at the Carpenter Center. Darren was doing film. We had all these people there. Nina Davenport, the documentary filmmaker, all these people around. And then a lot of the people
I believe as well. Yeah.
So we moved to New York. A lot of the guys people ended up moving to New York, as people did in that day, trying to find our fortune. And, Sean Goulet went off and started a magazine called KGB. That was a kind of ahead of its time kind of magazine that mixed like culture and media and ideas. And it was, it was sort of like 10 years ahead of what magazines were going to become. So, but they had a pretty good run of it. And so I would help doing design stuff for them, because I was at the School of Visual Arts in New York doing a degree in photography and related media.
This is after Harvard.
This is after Harvard. Yeah, I went to do a master's.
Because you did that, and then Darren went to AFI, but had a little break in the middle.
Yeah, so Darren was at AFI. So what Darren was doing went to AFI, and he was writing Pi. He was like working on his screenplays. He was always like working on writing screenplays and doing stuff, but he never seemed to have a job. He was just creating this stuff. And he actually, for a while, he worked out of an office that Dan Schrecker had. And we were all just doing our hustle, trying to make it by, doing a job for $500 here and whatever. But everybody who had a creative project, so whether it was Sean's magazine or Schrecker's multimedia project or whatever, we were just kind of calling on each other to help. I mean, I briefly had a record company where we made a music video. It was a music with Prince Paul from De La Soul, and he made this song called The Booty Clap, and we made a music video, which Darren, came along with the camera and helped shoot the film. So like we were all kind of like in that mindset of like early 20s, anything possible, let's just create together. So meanwhile, flash forward where Darren's gone to AFI, he's got this film he's gonna make, and he came to me to try and generate for Pi. He said, well, there's all these moments where this guy's using a computer screen and we need somebody to make all the graphics. And I'd been experimenting with a lot of interactive media. So I said, well, I can make those, I can design those screens, wherever he's typing, wherever Sean Goulet's character, Sean obviously is the lead actor, played the lead actor in Pi. I could create those screens and all the screens of data flowing and whatever. So I'd animated and created some of those. And I think Dan Schrecker helped me a little bit on that stuff. And when we were shooting those scenes, I mean, we had all these people, it was shot out in what's now, I think, Bushwick, in probably the hottest area of Bushwick, is where we were in a lighting warehouse that one of the producer's father had a lighting company. So there was a little soundstage in the corner there. And Nina Davenport from Harvard was filming a second camera, and Matty Libatique, the first time I met him, he was out there shooting. And we were shooting. I remember looking at the first test in black and white, and this kind of really extreme black and white look, like a really high contrast, crazy, because it was all shot on reversal film, right? It was all
black
positive.
And white, 16 millimeter reversal before the creation of Super 16.
Yes, exactly.
That's fucking tastic. And
so it was zero latitude.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it would bloom and it would look crazy. And there was all the stuff outside on the street that was mostly stolen, but the stuff even in the studio or where his headaches are going, I mean, it was just like, was really raw. And, but it felt like a real film set. I mean, I was lying under the table with my computer, pushing little key entries when Sean would be typing on his computer to make different animations happen, and the computer crashes. And anyway, got through the shoot, and it was great. And then I was at the time teaching at the School of Visual Arts and teaching a photography and kind of digital Photoshop class. I was sort of early into the early days of Photoshop. So I'd been doing Photoshop since probably 91. And I think it had probably only been in existence like a year before that. And I started to take a class because you could take a course for free if you're teaching there. So I took an animation course. I needed a project. So I said, Darren, can I do the title sequence, as my animation project for the film that you're making? Meanwhile, remember, this is a film that all of us worked on for no money, right? The idea was you tracked the days you worked, and the number of days you worked were logged, and they figured if anyone ever got paid, eventually you'd be paid back by the number of days you worked on it. It didn't matter if you were the editor or a DP or a runner,
Excellent gamble.
Excellent gamble. I mean, I can't say it was ever a huge payday, but the cool thing was I said, Darren, can I do a title sequence? He said, yeah, if it works, we'll use it. And if not, we'll put it at the end of the movie. So I designed this title sequence, which was, you know, using the flowing numbers. And this is before the Matrix, right? This was like, Pi came out before the Matrix thing, which was like, where people all
definitely.
So there was definitely a little bit of feeling of like, oh, I wonder if they saw what we did, you know?
Pi came out in 1998.
Is that true? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Pi came out in 98. And what year did the Matrix come out? I don't know. Probably 2000.
Now there we got it.
So I had this idea. I'm going to do the sequence, which is just the endless flowing of the numbers of pi, like starting with 314 and the fact that it's an infinite number. And that would be the basis for the title sequence. This number just flowing and then all these graphics coming on top of it, and made that thing, animated it, and actually shot it on 16 on an Oxbury.
Old school.
Printed it out. I rented a laser printer for like a week, printed it out, punched all the holes, registered it, and did it.
Fantastic.
And then after that, you know, Dan and Darren came to Dan and I, and he's like, hey, I have another idea for a film, but I want to have some crazy visuals. So can you help me maybe do these visual effects? You know, Photoshop, you can I'm sure you guys can figure it out. So we went into Requiem for a Dream and we started this company called Amoeba Proteus, and we decided we would just do visual effects, and we did a lot of them ourselves, and some we worked with with a company that had a flame at the time, or Inferno it was, which was like the sort of one of the highest end flame.
No. I mean, you're talking to a guy that was in the world, so yes.
Yeah, but I'm talking to the audience who may not have heard of Inferno.
Which would not have heard of it. I mean, these were the platforms that were the hardware platforms for people watching, right? That were before the system became sort of a software-based system, right? So discrete logic created things like Inferno, Flame, Smoke, all of these different platforms, but they were part of these massive computer hardware systems. And then later, the generations ahead would create products that were almost doable on a desktop.
Yeah, but at the time it cost like probably $500,000 for a full Inferno system with all the storage.
Well, it was, if not more. Yeah,
if not more. So we had these guys who had one, and we would go sit there in their place and work on it, and we did all the effects, you know, with the eye, all those, you know, the eye going, and then the blood vessels going in the veins, and the weird speed rampy things, and a lot of it we did some there on the Inferno and Flame, but some we actually did just in After Effects ourselves, in a little office next to where Darren was editing at Requiem, like literally next little room on 13th Street. For those nerds out there who want to know, this was this place called Plantain, and Plantain, the guy Tyler Brody, who was one of the producers, who sort of saw Pi at Sundance and got involved and really thought Darren was talented, gave this space, and he had this beautiful building on 13th Street. And the other person he gave space to at the time was James Murphy, to put a music studio down below. So basically we were in there with James Murphy, who obviously went off and became LCD Sound System and kind of was an amazing producer as well as performer. So he really kind of had this eye for letting the talent and for helping incubate and giving us these spaces. And it was kind of an amazing time. So yeah, we created this company called Amoeba Proteus, and we did stuff on Darren's films, and we worked on a lot of other little indie films.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you worked on Frida, Across the Universe. Yeah. You worked on Mr. Death for Errol Morris.
Yeah, that was the opening. Because one of the other things we started doing is, because on Pi, for instance, Dan and I, we also edited the music video. We did help on the poster, you know, on Requiem. Like, we were kind of like the visual, because there was always a design aspect to what we were doing. It wasn't like we were just the guys with the Inferno who would do what you told them. We were more like the guys who helped visualize this idea that someone had come up with and figure out how to execute it, but in a way that fit with the artistic nature of the material.
Design creative team to what Darren has kept throughout his career with Ari Handel and Mark Heyman as the writing team. And then, you know,
Dan Trecker has been on, you know, pretty much all of Darren's films doing the visual effects.
He's been on all of them, yeah. And then you have guys that were not part of, can I call them the Harvard Mafia? Is that all right? No, I can't call them the Harvard Mafia. The Harvard Gang, the Harvard Consortium of people that work together, the collaboration of people that knew each other as students. The only one who's not a member of that crew, I believe, is Andy Weissmuller, or was he a classmate of yours?
No, he wasn't, and Maddie wasn't.
And
Maddie was.
Maddie was L.A., so Maddie met Darren at AFI.
But Maddie's a New Yorker by birth. He's from the East Coast originally when he was a child, you know, and then grew up out west.
Of course, yeah, no, he had roots in Queens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, of course, yeah, no.
Yeah, so that was sort of what was going on. But as I said, it definitely came from the idea, which I feel like, I don't know how, I'm obviously not in my 20s anymore. And I just was speaking to a colleague of mine this morning who was who was my assistant, you know, a few years ago on a couple of films. And she's a very smart woman. And I was talking today, she turned 28 today. And she said, she was asking, we were somehow talking about what it was like when if I remember being that age. And I was like, you know what, when I was in our 20s in New York, it was a kind of thing where when I heard of an interesting creative project going on with some people, you wanted to be a part of it. You never thought there was even a financial aspect. There was no sense of even working on Pi. I remember the day that Pi got into Sundance. I got a call, I think from Eric Watson or somebody saying, Pi got into Sundance in competition. We were like, what? Like that, I don't even think there was an end game in our mind of even going to a festival. It was like the time was making this cool thing. And I did that with people in music and in art and in magazine things. And that whole energy of just like trying to be creative while you're trying to survive in your 20s and also playing hard too, as you do when you show up in a big city and it's like, wow, what's this place? I'm out of my box. And that was just like, that kind of set the tone for where everybody went in their own directions, but still people still kind of connect. And I think that thing, if people in their 20s are still doing that, which I know they are, you know, you see the ability people now have to create movies or music on their laptops or with a couple of friends in their bedroom, even more so than we could then.
Absolutely.
It's kind of an amazing thing to do. And obviously, you know, some people have more luxurious situations in terms of like how they're going to pay the rent during those things. And, you know, I had jobs always and was working, and but it was definitely the type of thing where it was kind of like the job would show up at the exact moment that you were totally broke. You know, I got this gig because I knew Photoshop early on. I got this gig doing illustrations for magazines. Like I had a roommate, my roommate from college came down. He was doing journalism about hip hop. So I had this job where I would be doing a lot of photography of hip hop groups. And I started shooting at the same time period. I was like shooting hip hop concerts for the PR agencies for like $200 a pop, you know, and you give them your pictures, shooting for things that were in Vibe or The Source, or doing album covers. I started designing album covers for this record label called Roar, Reach Out International Records, which was a cassette only label originally that started going to CDs. And they were famous for putting out, for instance, the Bad Brains Band in DC album. And they were this guy, Neil Cooper, who had loved music, and he was down in Soho, and he'd had this record label for ages. And he was the ex-husband of Paula Cooper Gallery. So he was part of the downtown kind of art scene in the 80s. So you end up just sort of, we were hustling to get by. And obviously by going to Harvard and being, you know, and having some of these connections, we probably had more of an advantage to survive than some. But I do think that whole idea of just going for creative stuff while you're trying to survive and just doing something because it sounds interesting and cool to be a part of, rather than thinking about where it's going to end up, ultimately worked out well. And I'm sure some people it works out better and less better, and there's an element of luck to it, but it was definitely something that inspired and still kind of drives my thought processes now. Like even now as a producer working on films, or people come to me with a project, I definitely think there isn't a film that I've worked on that I don't think is like a worthy film or that I'm not proud of. You know, it doesn't mean that they were always a commercial success, but they're at least like somebody going for something, whether they fail or succeed, is to me kind of way more interesting than something where somebody is just, you know, they don't have actually some kind of real mental goal in mind of something they're trying to achieve. To me, that's always been exciting, and I've always liked being a collaborator. I mean, part of projects, and I think maybe I ended up a producer because I like the idea of helping give birth to these things, even if they were somebody else's idea or somebody else's baby.
Right on, right on. A perfect transition for me right at this moment, quite frankly, because for me, you had the opportunity as a collaborator to incubate with and to contribute with all of your VFX and design work, and then Wes Anderson. Your relationship with Wes turns from, I think, starting doing VFX for Life Aquatic, but on Darjeerling, you were a co-producer.
Yeah, I mean, basically,
you were a producer, right?
Yeah, I mean, Wes isn't really the kind of person that likes to follow the rules. So he has his own rules of what's going to work and not work. So I think the whole transition to producing was him saying to me, "You could do that," which I probably had more doubt than him because he doesn't operate that way. But I think that part of my way of trying to do something is, if I have something I'm trying to get done, figure something out, or I've told someone I'm going to do something, or I feel a responsibility, I will work really hard to make it happen. And on Life Aquatic, I was doing what I'd done on a bunch of these other movies, whether it's Frida or whatever. There were things in the script that needed to be done in a way that there were these creative moments, in these cases, these fantastical creatures or things like that appeared in Life Aquatic. And, Wes, like Julie Taymor and like Darren, and, he didn't want to have stuff look like, what sort of CG slick effects. He wanted something that had texture and had life and was more interesting. So he had the idea of using stop motion animation, which I had never done anything with before, but he wanted somebody to help figure out how all this stuff was going to work in the film. So I went over to Italy, and it was a big operation, that film. And it was a little bit, they were out at sea, so it was hard to communicate. I remember this is like the pre-email on your phone days. So I was over in Italy trying to figure things out, and working. Mark Friedberg, the great production designer who was doing that film, who also now works with Darren, so like the New York world.
This is Life Aquatic now.
Yeah, Mark Friedberg. I remember he said, "Hey, because I was over there and not knowing what was going on. He's like, well, why don't you set up a desk in the art department? We've got space." So I was in the art department and just trying to figure things out and talking with Mark, but a lot of things I had to do on my own. Like I had to kind of go and figure out, like, how are we doing this part of the thing? And there was nobody around to ask. And those guys were out on a boat at sea and didn't come back till 8:00 at night. And I was like driving an hour and a half down to like Sabaudia, which is like, on the coast of Italy, to like meet them at RAP at the edit room to like show Wes some drawings and get his notes and then drive back. I mean, it was just like, it was a really crazy operation. And I think to get the things done that I needed to get done, I had to do a lot of just like producing my own little units. At one point I was shooting giant miniatures with motion control rigs on one stage, and I had divers underwater in another stage in a tank that I was shooting, that I created a underwater drop by just putting like going to Cinecittà backdrop shop and putting things. So I was doing a lot of figuring out on my own, and then I would record things on a clamshell and run over to where Wes was shooting on another stage. I didn't really know him. I'd wait, and the AD would shout at me, and then I would go in and show him the thing. So I think afterwards he sort of thought, okay, well, this guy Jeremy's been doing all this stuff like without us. How's he even doing that? Well, while we're making this movie on a boat, and he's like getting all these things. So I think he sort of saw in me some ability to like get things done, which is one side of producing, I guess. I just saw it as like something I had to do in order to do the other part of my job. And then I kind of transitioned into producing from there, but I hadn't completely given up. I mean, even on Black Swan, I still worked on designing the title sequence for Darren, just literally for old time's sake, and I think that even now, when I work with Wes, for instance, I might do some helping of presetting shots on sort of second unit, or I will sometimes take an image that's going back and forth into Photoshop and mock it up, say, you mean like this? Or, sometimes I literally dig into the visuals a little bit in the course of my job to help bridge a gap between one department and another, or to help communicate something to Wes. And same thing in the marketing. And, you know, I think that the experience of the actual physical production experience and the knowing how to design things and having that knowledge technically and creatively is a helpful additive skill.
Of course it is. Yeah. And, you know, having completed now 2 stop motion films and Fantastic Mr. Fox and then also Isle of Dogs. I mean, you were working within your own universe with teams of people that were specialized at that, right?
Oh yeah. Those films were huge. And obviously I started Mr. Fox not knowing that much about stop motion other than what had been done on Life Aquatic. And we had this other producer, Alison Abate, who had a lot of experience with stop motion. And then by the time I got to Isle of Dogs, obviously I'd been through a whole 2.5-year cycle of stop motion. I knew everything and knew a lot of the players, and it's a different skill set. Like running a stop motion film, it's a little bit more like running a company. Like it's like you're managing a production facility more than it is like making a movie, because in a movie you just have so many instant decisions that are flowing, and in stop motion you have things like, are these puppets going to be, like, it's January, we need those 83 puppets done by June. Are they going to be done? And you can't tell because right now one of them's a lump of clay and the other one. So it's like, there's a real process of like tracking and analyzing where you are and projecting and thinking through that. And we obviously had some great people on these films who are just very specialists in those arenas. You know, Simon Quinn, who's a great animation line producer, and his whole career is built in animation, and Angela Poshed, who did this scheduling of that movie, which is like of Isle of Dogs, which is just like an insane matrix of scheduling. Like there's a person who has an entire room full of just like charts of like, where's this puppet going to be on this day, and where's this animator going to be, and you're shooting 40 stages at once. Maybe about 20 that are live and 10 that are getting dressed and 10 that are getting struck, and you're just like trying to make it through, you know, a few seconds a day until you have a movie. So those things are grueling.
For those people who are of always, there will be people who are technical nerds about how this stuff was shot. These were shot on still DSLR cameras in small stages, and shot in individual stills.
Right.
Correct?
Exactly. Yeah, one of them was shot on Canon and the other on Nikon. Just because we're sort of always keeping up with what's the best camera for the day, and the camera that is best is not necessarily the one that's best for a photographer. It's like, this one is, you know, if one of them has, because these cameras are on for and shooting the same set for days on end, it literally might be, the choice might come down to which one has less heat fluctuation in the sensor over the course of 12 hours, you know, and that's just something that probably isn't fully being factored into like what the manufacturer thinks is needed for their camera. So some of it's just like residual. It could be like where they place the power supply vis-a-vis the chip or whatever. So we're always testing and using, you know, lenses, but then of course the motion control rigs and things that we use for those are very similar to, you know, motion control rigs you'd use for live action. Obviously they're moving one frame at a time, but some of them can also be used for live action. I mean, we had a gazelle or one of those, you know, or giraffe, one of those little crane rigs on this last movie. And then we had a guy build custom rigs for us. It's super nerdy. I mean, it's kind of amazing that to be running a movie where you've got a machine shop. We had a guy who was literally just building practical lights of miniature practical lights and wiring.
This is for Isle of Dogs.
Yeah, for Isle of Dogs. We had an entire team of people just working on rapid prototyping with 3D printers of different types. We had casting and molding and paint shops and laser cutters. And so literally, like, I was wishing I wasn't so busy making a movie, because I kept thinking of all the things I would want to make, you know, like furniture and like cool, you know, coat racks and like whatever you could make with all these super talented people.
And they're all made in scale, miniature size, and small sets. So this, yeah. I remember seeing you in London between films, and you telling me, well, I'll be on this for, was it 2 years to do each one? So explain to me on a timeline like that. I mean, I think people are fascinated by this. A feature film narrative, low budget, 30 days, middle to high budget, 45 to 55 days, and then sometimes even greater. But for a stop motion job, you have stages of production. Some of it is obviously set building and construction and building the actual clay characters. And then there's the physical shooting. Give me a sense for as an educational thing, what are the stages of time that are completely obviously uncommon to physical production for stop motion animation for both Fantastic Mr. Fox and Isle of Dogs?
I mean, I would say the sort of basic way that it tends to have worked, and then obviously it extends out, is kind of a year of prep and design, design prep, building puppets, organize, then a year of animating. Obviously there's leakage on both sides. Post is sort of being done simultaneously with the shooting, because you can be going as you go, right? Because there's no real editing per se. So you obviously have to do a finished DI and you have to do a sound mix and scoring, but that's a relatively compressed post schedule. You could start scoring when you still have, if you have 82 out of an 87-minute film shot and the rest is animatic storyboards, you can still score it. You don't have to have the thing finished. So it's that kind of stuff overlaps. The shooting, I mean, your average animator is doing, depends how quickly and how rough your animation is. It could be anywhere from 5 to 15 seconds a week. Let's say we may have based our schedule for this on a 10-second a week per animator, 2 seconds a day. Some days an animator does a 10-second shot in a day. Sometimes they are stuck. Sometimes a puppet breaks. But that's sort of the timeline. And, everything has to be ready for when it's ready. So if you've got all these sets being built and you have something like Isle of Dogs, which has a couple of hundred sets, you're having to build them and schedule it and line up everything so that the assets all arrive at the same time. And also what ends up happening is, of course, suddenly you've got no space left because you're making so much crap.
Wow.
So it's really an endurance thing. And at a certain point, you definitely think it's not possible that we'll ever finish this movie. And then you do.
That's awesome. The teams, not to do credit advertising, but the teams for both films were not the same, or were there common players? Did you hire a team you were in the UK, did you hire a team outside on the continent in Poland or somewhere else, or were you working all with UK artists?
I mean, the team, there were a lot of people who worked on both the films just because they're the best people some of the best people in the world. We also had some new people who had been, who we didn't know about when we did the first one, but some people like Simon, has done almost any one of these stop motion movies. He's done them. So, and then you've got the guys out in Portland now with Leica. So there's a bit more of an industry around. Our animators, I think, were from 15 different countries. We had animators from the UK, from New Zealand, from the US, from Bulgaria, from Belgium. I mean, they're from France, from Spain. I mean, it's really one of these things where it's such a specialized thing that you'll just take the good people in the world. We did almost everything in-house, and we built the studio from the ground up, meaning there was a studio, a regular film studio that we used for both films. But we installed and built up the workshops, built up a puppet workshop, built up bought all the tools, literally, we created the facility. We bought all the computers.
This is all in London at a stage like Pinewood or Nell Street or wherever.
Three Mills it's called, yeah.
3 Mills, okay.
Yeah. But we even had to put up a pop-up building to be a workshop because there wasn't enough space. And then the puppet workshop, we found the puppet guy, Andy Gent, who was an amazing puppet maker, and he'd been sort of the head of the puppet maintenance department on Mr. Fox. He ended up building all the puppets instead of using one of the big outside puppet companies. Although we did outsource a certain set of puppets to a small vendor in Poland, specifically for this. Wes was really enamored with this Peter and the Wolf stop motion that came out probably 10 years ago now, or 12 years ago.
From a company in Łódź that was near the film school in Poland. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So some of the people,
those guys at Camera Mosh. Yeah.
right, exactly. So some of those people, the woman who oversaw the Susie Templeton directed it, but she made it in Poland, and the woman who had been in charge of making the puppets, Wes really liked the wolf. So we had those mangy kind of the mangy dogs in Isle of Dogs, who are the ones who are living in the kind of treatment facility with all the little experiments on them. So those ones we had made by this Polish company. And it was to get this kind of great feeling to them. But otherwise, everything was made by us. And like I said, a lot of the same people came back, and a lot of new great discoveries too. And just an amazing crew of the most talented. It's very inspiring and amazing that those things get done. And
amazing.
So as a producer, like one of the things, because it takes so long to do it, and because you're not seeing every moment get shot, because normally during a film, you're sort of around, and you kind of remember every day. But so much is going on at once, and you're dealing with so many things that there's a magic to it. So I actually weirdly can look at, like, Mr. Fox, I can watch over and over again much more easily than I can watch other films that I worked on.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's just what an achievement, right? Is what it is, right?
Yeah, it's a miracle.
It really is a miracle. And then you got to do these films that are amazing signature films from Wes, like the Darjeeling Limited, Moonrise Kingdom, and of course the Grand Hotel Budapest, which you were nominated for. It was nominated for an Academy Award. I mean, these are big narrative features, and now a film that's yet to come up, The French Dispatch. There are a common crew for those as well. I believe Bob Yeoman shoots a lot of them. Is that right? And you have people. Wes creates an ensemble, right?
Yeah, Bob shot all of them that weren't stop motion.
Yeah. Wonderful. I love that.
And he's great. And of course, and a lot of the same people came back, or they move along through their careers. I mean, Milena Canonero, this one again.
Andy is an editor, right? Andy Weissborn.
Yeah. So Andy actually, I feel like Andy, was my visual effects editor on The Fountain when I was doing the visual effects for The Fountain for Darren.
Right, because the main editor was Jay Rabinowitz, that Andy was sort of a second to. Is that correct?
Andy was sort of, like, he wasn't even in the editor room. Matt Mayer was the first assistant, and Andy, we needed a visual effects editor, and his name came up because he knew stuff about visual effects. So he was the visual effects editor. So I worked very closely with Andy for like a year on The Fountain. And then I think he went off and did Zoe Cassavetes' film, which was a super tiny film. But Wes was starting Darjeeling, and he said to me, do you know anybody, an editor who, anybody who's like smart and up and coming? Because I want to maybe work with someone who, with just a new energy, and somebody who maybe is like, maybe they aren't like already a name yet. And I said, well, this guy, Andy, I gave him a couple of names, 2 names, I think. One of them was Andy, who I said, well, I just worked with this guy, Andy, and he's really smart on The Fountain. And he's like, I know he's doing the Zoe Cassavetes thing right now, but Wes knew Zoe, he called Zoe. And so he ended up hiring Andy. And then Darren hired Andy to start working with him after that. I
know I witnessed these battles actually, because of course I was in the middle of the two of them, handling dailies and finishing, or at least part of both for either director. And I knew that there was a tug of war over Andy to go from one film to the other. Is that correct?
I mean, I don't know if it's a tug of war. It seems to have worked its way out, but I do think that Andy didn't do Grand Budapest because he was busy on, I guess, was it Noah at the time? I've lost track of what happened when, but I think that, I was just going to try and say that I feel like Andy owes me a very nice, like, whatever, retirement gift at some point.
That's true, man. We all play a part, but not as significant as the one you played.
I'm not going to take any credit for it, because Andy's going to watch this podcast and he's going to call me. He already called me this morning. I told him I was doing it. So, anyway.
That's okay. Hey, man, I say tip a hat. I love you guys. I've been, as you know, and not just a compadre with Darren back to Harvard, but if you don't remember the story, it was a pretty spectacular story as it took place. Darren was very vocal when you guys were at the Carpenter Center together, and I left Duarte to go to Technicolor in 1990 after having been with Duarte for part of a year in 1989 into 1990. And Darren basically single-handedly caused insurrection at the Carpenter Center and said, by the way, Charlie left Duarte. We're going to follow him to his drop-off at Technicolor. And that's when our relationship began. And it went all the way through to Noah, my last film working at the label. So yeah. He's, the whole team it's a family. Yeah.
And Wes has a similar one. I mean, he's obviously has Milena Canonero, who did the costumes again on French Dispatch, and Adam Stockhausen, who was the art director of Darjeeling, but has designed the last few and is also now designing for Spielberg. And, so these guys are, both Darren and Wes are the kind of filmmakers who demand excellence and are not going to compromise and will push. And they need really good people who are both creatively really good and really smart to get their films done, or they wouldn't get done, I think,
Absolutely. And through Wes, you created a relationship with a company that I believe is still around called Indian Paintbrush that brought you in to do Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, which was not a left turn, but continuity with not with Wes, but with the company that produced Wes, because Indian Paintbrush also produced or financed a lot of Wes's films, correct?
Yeah. So, the Indian Paintbrush relationship was with Wes started at the time of Darjeeling, and that's when you first met them as a teammate on that, right? Yeah, they did Darjeeling, and they came in on Darjeeling and on Mr. Fox as sort of co-financiers. And I think they didn't use the name Indian Paintbrush. I think they had a different name at the time, began with a C. I forget what it was called.
Okay.
But anyway, it was Stephen Rail's company, and he was a big fan of Wes's and wanted to get into films, and then I ended up doing Me and Earl with them because they had this project they were excited about, and they just needed another producer on it to help kind of shepherd it through. So I did that, and it was sort of good timing of when it worked out, and the film turned. I'm very proud of that film. It was also really fun to do something that was so 24 days or whatever it was, with an art department of 3 people. And it was a great experience to do that. And I love that the director of that's very talented, Alfonso Gomez Rejon.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. And I tell people about it, quite frankly, because what I love about it is it's a film made by a cinema lover. I mean, those reenactments by the 2 boys of Agira, the Wrath of God, these recreation shorts that were done by these kids of these classic films, and they created their own little movies as part of the narrative, along with this very compelling story about the Connie Britton, the mom who basically ignites these kids' demand to spend time with this girl who's dying of cancer. So it's just, what an incredible story.
Yeah, it was a good one. And then, since then who knows what the future will bring. I mean, obviously I've still, I've got some projects I've been working on with other, young film. I've always still been excited by the idea of just trying to help things along. So there's been filmmakers who've come to me, or short films I've worked on, people who haven't made a feature, and I've helped them on those things. Once again, not with any strategic thing, but just more like, oh, this person seems talented, and let's try and help with this thing. I've been doing I've got a film with this photographer, Alex Prager, who's done a bunch of shorts, and she's a sort of doing well-known art photographer, and does also a lot of commercials and things. And we've got a film at Searchlight that we've been developing together, and the film, the script is still going through the phases there, and a few other things like that are sort of in the pipeline. And then you just have to hope at some point that all the people you want to work with, that all the things kind of, the chips fall into place. Of
course,
that's the game.
Oh yeah, it is. And during all of this craziness, And all of these years of going through a career of doing visual effects and titles and producing, you also managed to find the time to get into a business that I dabbled in at one point and got out of, the restaurant business.
I think you were smart to get out.
I got out in 2017, and boy, I got to tell you right now, where we were on Hudson Street between Morton and Barrow at my old Alexandra restaurant.
Yeah.
Not where you want to be during the pandemic. I'm not saying there's anywhere that you want to be during the pandemic, but that's definitely not where you want to be during the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, the restaurant thing was, that was one of these things. We have a bar and a one that has a bar with more food. And my brother, they're both with my brother and another partner, but the first one just came into, it was one of these things, once again, something that sounded cool. It wasn't like we were sitting there talking about doing it. It was about this building came up and we knew it was for sale. And my sister-in-law, future sister-in-law at the time, she's like, there's this place and it used to be a Sicilian social club and they're closing down and it's kind of cool. And I was like, oh, that's cool. That sounds like it'd be such a cool bar. And they looked at me like, that's exactly what we were thinking. Do you want to go see it? We got the key. I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, the old guy there just said, if you want to look at it, here, take the key. Like, it was like that really old Brooklyn Carroll Gardens vibe,
Oh, yeah.
So that was like 16 years ago or something.
It's an old Italian neighborhood.
Yeah. So we went over there and we ended up taking that place and became the Brooklyn Social. And then we opened another place, Henry Republic, a few years later. And obviously Brooklyn Social, we were in the process of building it out. And then that's when I went to do Life Aquatic. So I bought a lot of decoration and things in Rome at the flea markets in Rome while I was doing Life Aquatic. But by the time the next one's now, my career has gotten busier and I spent so much of my time over in Europe. My brother and his wife and Tracy, our other partner, do most of the running of them. And I don't do that much anymore, but it was a great experience. And right now it's tough, but hopefully they're both kind of neighborhood beloved spots. I'm hoping that they're the kind of spot that people will still want to support, in whether they're wearing PPE or not, we will see.
Well, I mean, I think you just said a second or so ago that the opportunity came with actually buying the building and doing the restaurant. Is that how it came down?
It's a longer, more complicated story than that.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. But
yeah.
But I will say that the keys to the castle, because I know that from during my brief period with my partner in that business, I certainly learned that restaurants like Raoul's that own their building, or like the Ear Inn that have basically 100-year lease kind of deal, one of those.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a bit more stable.
Yeah, they're gonna come back. They'll be boarded up so that the glass doesn't get broken. But they will return. Of course, here in my neighborhood in Park Slope, Skylark and Monroe and all the bars on Fifth Avenue, I mean, they're all serving drinks out of their window from into plastic cups like we're living in New Orleans.
Everyone's doing that, but obviously that's not going to work very well in New York in the winter.
No.
And second of all, at some point they're going to crack down on people. Right now, I mean, New York's been one of those places after living in England and these places like that. The idea of seeing somebody walking down the street with a beer is like shocking to Americans. When it becomes less shocking once you spend some time over in Europe. But I think the prudishness will come back at some point.
Yeah. Of course. So apropos of the impact of the pandemic on the obvious economics of the hospitality business, I'm interested to hear now that you have a film that's completed in Wes's new film that has an October release plan, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I had a podcast recently with Boaz Yakin, who directed a film called Aviva, his second in a sequence of independent films that he produced and directed himself with a group of people, low budget films. This last one went out in a release through a new platform that I had never heard of before. Basically, the distributors were selling tickets through movie chains, like even a Regal or an AMC.
Yeah.
But the movie tickets they were selling were for VOD streaming. So people were.
What was the platform?
I want to say I know, and I feel kind of goofy not knowing what it was, but it was a ticketing platform like a Fandango or a Movie Phone type thing. And when you buy the ticket, you get the right for for streaming the film at home, but you're buying the equivalent of a movie ticket, and the movie ticket becomes part of theatrical box office. And I might add, the actual subscription availability, that would mean obviously Amazon, Netflix, Disney Plus, and the list goes on, HBO Max, the ancillary opening of the ability to either rent on an iTunes or Amazon or another platform was given a theatrical window, right? Because here lies the problem that took place with The Irishman when it got released.
Right.
Netflix refused to provide a 30, a 60, or a 90-day window, and negotiations fell apart. The commercial theaters kicked them out, and then they had a theatrical release at independent theaters. That story is already told. This is a new model that enables a window, but it's not with the theater. It's buying viewings as part of the box office strategy, but not theater viewings.
I mean, I similarly got I'm wondering if it was the same platform, because there was this film that a little film that I know had been at Tribeca last year. It's one called Crushed, and I got some emails about an online screening of that as well, that you buy a ticket at a sort of Eventbrite type site, you know?
Right.
But I think that obviously this is going to have some effect on the windows. I think, from a person at home, and I think, the experience, the market is being shaken up. Obviously the theaters are hurting, not having any income, and they were hurting anyway. But I do think that having a market, to me as a consumer, if I've got my television or my projector, I've got a projector here at home, and I want to watch a movie on that projector, and I can watch the movie on Hulu because I subscribe to Hulu, or I can watch the movie on HBO, whatever. Or I can watch the movie because it's X number of weeks earlier, I can watch the movie by clicking on a button and paying $20 to watch it. I'm basically watching a movie on my screen, and sometimes I have to pay for it, sometimes I don't. And I think for people, the whole concept of windows is driven by the fact that the thing was in the theater. And I think so if you don't go in the theater at all, people's concept of the window, of like what it means to see it first or early and pay more for that, is disrupted a little bit. So I think people are gonna have to settle into the new reality of what that is. Like, there is a culture of wanting to be timely. There's always been that culture of like, if everybody's talking about, did you see blah, 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 and you haven't seen it yet, you're a little bit left out. So there is a premium to that.
And that's part of streaming culture as well. The water cooler exists for Game of Thrones. The water cooler exists for a series like The Affair, and the water cooler also exists for movies that are streamed.
Right. It definitely does when it comes up, or like Tiger King or something, right?
King, they giddy up.
But I think that, I think obviously that people are going to be trying out different things. It'll shake out some way. There's reasons that the theaters want to protect the windows, obviously, because of the way the money works. And I guess the economics will all sort of start to shift, and we'll see where we end up. I think right now people are going to try anything and everything. And I think if you've got a little independent film, you're more flexible than if you've got a film that either costs a lot of money, so it needs to recoup, because obviously as soon as you go to these VOD things, it might affect international box office or affects the piracy of the film. So you have to be, and also studios might have bigger studios. They might have deals with airlines, windows for the airlines, or windows for HBO exclusives or whatever. And all those things are part of the recoupment, modeling. And so if you throw and even the irony is something like how much your film is worth to an HBO or something depends on how well it did at the box office. A big hit film has a bigger, but so suddenly it's all shaken up. So the models will have to realign at some point, and I don't know where it's going to go. I mean, I'm hoping people still like to see things in to me, the most distressing thing of anything is not people seeing it at home or a theater or anything. It's just the idea that people might be watching a movie while they're doing something else. Because when the kind of filmmakers I've worked with, I'm realizing that they're so attentive to every pixel and every beep sound effect and every dart of somebody's eyes in the background and there so much has gone into that they're considering that you could put all your attention freeze frame and stare at this frame as long as you want, and you're going to get everything in there is there because they want it there. And if someone is Instagramming, texting, cooking, eating a pizza, talking to their friend while it's playing on the, while they're walking down the street, they're not going to get the thing that they're not going to get the real experience that this person thought they were trying to create. Like anytime you're color correcting a film, you're in a perfectly calibrated dark room reading the screen with a gun. You know that you're not just mixing it on your laptop, you're mixing in a stage, so what's the point of all that if people aren't going to experience it that way? Like these things are being made to have the ability to have a great experience. It doesn't mean someone can't enjoy it differently, but I think in the same way that some people are still going to buy a great stereo system because they want to hear music properly, and some people are fine to just use the free earbuds you get on the airplane. I think that there's always going to be a version of people wanting to experience a movie as the object it was supposed to be made. It's like, do you want to go see a famous painting at MoMA and stand in front of it, or do you just want to look at a picture of it online?
Well, the home theater, not as a replacement, but an augmented space, has become more sophisticated. Pretty much every new screen being sold right now is a 4K capable, and through at least the platform I have at home through Apple, I can get Netflix and Amazon in 4K. If
Right.
I go so far as to build surround sound, I can get an immersive sound experience. And then now Amazon, as well as Netflix, are adding on the experience of what the new version of Dolby Atmos is, which is Atmos HT, the Atmos home theater audio experience. So there's an attempt to take what people are investing in. Of course, this is not the entire population of moviegoers. Let's get real for a second. But it's a growing population of people who are home viewers that are investing into the possibility of receiving these films in the best possible way, albeit that the larger box office audience still relies on a cinema environment to see it in this way.
Yeah, and some people aren't gonna. I mean, it's not cheap to have a good home theater, and you need.
No, exactly.
I mean, who's got an extra room in New York City? And there's a lot of people who are struggling just to have a place to live, let alone an extra room for their TV.
Exactly right. So I agree with you thoroughly. That's a necessity to give the full experience that the director created, which is where we started.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that it has to be even theatrical. In some sense, I do think though that, like, I was one of those people that was distressed as like, okay, the transition from LPs to CDs and analog to digital, people complained about that, and some will say you lose something in the sounding, but CDs were at least trying to create, at the time, something that had a high level of fidelity. Then it suddenly transitioned to everybody listening on MP3s, which were a much more compressed, lower quality than the CD. And you start to think, like, at some point, why wouldn't at some point, like, it doesn't really make sense to use technology to figure out ways to, like, lessen the quality of what's delivered to us. If we wanted to, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point the phone is going to have a full, cinema mode. There's going to be some way that you can, there'll be some very simple way to get, like, amazing quality. There'll be some little add-on, amazing little Atmos grid you pop your phone into, and it'll tell you your lights are too light, and it'll calibrate your screen to the light, and you'll push a button to, like, stop all alerts, and you'll watch your film.
They'll find more immersive ways for people to view. No question about it.
VR.
Yeah, VR absolutely, and they will create technology to be able to do all of this. I mean, for me, we're in a run now for a dry up of content that's even more threatened than we're as threatened as the exhibitors, because right now we're awaiting when parts of the world open up for physical production. What have you been hearing about that?
Yeah, I think, well, I just want to say one other quick thing, which is I also think there is an aspect, not just to going to the cinema, but going to the cinema with people. I think people have watched so much stuff in their homes lately. And there is that feeling of going to see a movie and then going out for a drink afterwards or a snack and like talking about it that people are going to miss, which is different than the water cooler talking.
Absolutely.
With the Joneses versus like, you know, you're not going to get into real-time conversation unless you just saw it with a person in the same time. You get that thing like that moment where she looked at him like this and you know, okay. But anyway, to jump into production, I mean, I've seen the industry white paper. It's less onerous than I imagined. I think that everyone is trying to, I think the film industry compared to a lot of industries seems to be trying to be, and partly that's because, you know, they're used to organizing groups of people and being very, you know, controlling your experience over the course of the day compared to other work sites. But I think the film industry is trying to be at least as responsible, if not more responsible than almost any other industry. You know, I mean, construction seems to have started back up and it's like, yeah, maybe they're taking temperatures or not, but it's not like it's changed the way that they're like literally like I don't think they're doing COVID tests like once a week on every single person coming to the construction site and, you know, quarantining anybody from like anybody who is at the supply room can't actually like exit the supply room to bring things onto the site. Like, so I think that the film industry is trying to be responsible, and obviously it's always a very intense environment. You spend many hours and you can be cramped in a bathroom for like 8 hours. So I see why we're doing it. I think that's good, but I think it's going to figure out a way. I mean, I think there'll be a little blip, maybe there'll be a little content blip, but then I think it's going to open back up. And there's a lot of things, you know, I hear a lot of things, people champing at the bit to go. And obviously in other countries, they're already going, whether it's Iceland and New Zealand, and Prague seems pretty much ready to go. And England, they're talking about going, although that might be premature. And I think by end of the summer, beginning of fall, there'll be a bunch of things shooting here. And it's just really like, yeah, how are we going to deal with films with like a lot of people probably who don't work on movies may not realize how many people are there working on them when you're doing them. You know, like if you've got a big film with a lot of extras, it's not just the extras, but you might have brought in an extra 25 costume people and 50 makeup people just to put the makeup and costume on all these extras. So like, that's just like a lot of people. And the other thing is you've got a bunch of extras. They're like sitting in a gym all day long, like crammed on top of each other, you know? So it's going to be, there's some puzzles to figure out, but I know that we've got smart people in the industry and I think there's only so much appetite there's going to be for films that are just the ones, you know, people aren't going to want to watch like 5 years of like My Dinner with Andre over and over again. You know, they're going to want some big things. And whether those things are cured through visual effects or through geography of where they shoot or new protocols or the vaccine, we don't know. But let's just hope. We got to watch some stuff, Charlie.
Yeah, baby. Absolutely. One thing I never asked you about, and because I didn't know about it when I first met you, is were you born and raised in Vancouver, or you're by origin Canadian?
I was born in the States and I moved to Canada when I was 2.
Oh, when you were 2, okay.
My dad's Canadian though, and he was an English professor up there. So he got a job when I was 2 and moved up there. So I don't really remember living in the States other than post college. I mean, but other than
you went to Harvard, yeah. I mean, yeah. But you went through all of your growing up years in Vancouver. What was the foundation from childhood and your home life that led you into a desire to explore initially design and all the things that you've done that led to your visual effects world and then on into filmmaking?
I mean, I don't know. I was a good student, so I was like interested in science and math, and I think I applied to all these other schools for like engineering and robotics. And I don't think I knew what I was going to do, but I had always done a lot of photography. Like in high school, I did photography and yearbook and stuff.
You're a visual artist. Yeah. Yeah.
And then when I went to Harvard, I did some classes in there, and there was a teacher teaching the photography, this woman, Robin Wessner. I don't know if you ever came across her.
Mm-hmm.
And she was just an adjunct teaching. And she was like, oh, at one point she's like, oh, so this is what you're going to do? Are you going to do this? And I was like, do what? It hadn't occurred to me that I could just do something creative as a job. You know what I mean? I'd never really crossed my mind. I never really had any pressure from my family of like what to do or what to study. Like they were pretty relaxed about it. Like I know there's obviously a lot of people who were real pressure to not go to art school and go to med school or whatever it was. I wasn't my thing. So then I just kind of made that decision, but I did always love movies. You know, my parents liked movies, and there was a great theater called the Ridge Theater in Vancouver growing up that was, you know, one of those rep theaters. It would show like a double bill every night, and it might be like, it's Truffaut month or it's this. So we saw a lot of films like, you know, with my being 12 years old or whatever, and my parents would have friends over for dinner, and then we'd all go to a movie, and we'd all go to the movie together, you know. And so it was like, and this was like an 800 seat art theater, you know, with like
Wow.
cappuccino and like artisanal stuff in the lobby in like the 80s, you know. So Vancouver always had that kind of cinephile thing, like in theaters like the Brattle or whatever, one of those kind of places, but big. But I also grew up without a television, which might have something to do with it.
How interesting.
Yeah.
So you were not given the opportunity to zone out in front of a TV. If you wanted visual entertainment, it was in a movie theater.
Yeah, or it was just making my own, you know, entertainment, whatever that was. But yeah, definitely. I liked to go to the movies when I was in high school, and you know, you'd go downtown with your friends and go to the Cineplex Odeon.
Right on, right on. And your parents themselves, not artists, or your father was a literature professor?
Yeah.
At UBC?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And any siblings in the film business? Any partners in crime? None of that.
My brother did acting for a long time, and his wife as well. So he's a very good actor, and he did a lot of theater and stuff, but nobody like in the making or production or writing side, you know, so much.
Yeah, interesting. And now the next highlight accomplishment for you is when French Dispatch will be released, which you said is still on plan for October. Well, and not to end the episode with a plug, but certainly we'll want to keep our eye on it after we put this episode up. Is it still tracking for October?
Yeah, October 16th, and it's, once again, I mean, Wes is not the kind of guy who rests on his laurels, and like he pushes himself each time. So this one is like, you know, more complex and wilder than the last one. So I think it's a pretty crazy accomplishment, and it's like it's a really interesting movie for our time, because it's a bit of a celebration of journalism and the art of journalism, and in terms of like the writer being a proxy for you to have an experience. So it's got these different these different stories from this magazine, a fictional magazine in a fictional city in France. That's a little bit of a New Yorker-esque type of magazine. And they're just, each of the stories is great, and the characters who are the writers are great, and the cast, once again, I'm not even going to go into it.
And
it's like,
it was all shot in France, obviously, but not in Paris, or in Paris?
Not in Paris, no. In a town called Angoulême.
Angoulême, okay.
Angoulême.
Yeah, I know where
it's where they do the comic book festival every year.
For real, yeah?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting area, because it's not far from Bordeaux and Bergerac and all of that stuff, right? Angoulême is down that area.
Exactement.
Not
far from Bordeaux. It's like an hour from Bordeaux.
Nice. Yeah. I remember visiting Angoulême.
It's taken me a full year to like lose the extra weight from eating all the butter.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
That's the location living in the place with the greatest food and wine in the world, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It took a pandemic to get my belly back in shape.
Hey man, I'm all about City Bike these days, as I think I mentioned to you yesterday. And thank you, by the way, your tip yesterday, the Manhattan Bridge. Not to go off course off our podcast, I actually made it into the city in record time, and I saw the spill out off the Brooklyn Bridge. I never would have gotten in.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for doing this, Charlie. It was fun.
Dude, this is fabulous. Thank you so much, Jeremy. What a great time.
To the 7 million people who watch it, thank you for listening.
7 million people. Hey, listen, the one thing about these episodes is, remember, they're never taken down.
Well, that's not fair.
Yeah, no. It's also very good because it means that I have episodes like, with Keanu Reeves. Obviously, it's a little crazy because they're over 42,000 views, but they mount over time and people watch them and they come back.
I'm happy. For me, this is going into a vault of memory. Great conversation. I'm not going to watch myself. No offense, but
you're not going to watch yourself in the episode. Okay. Yeah. Understood. No problem. Thank you so much, Jeremy. This was great. Bye. See you, man. Thank you.
Later.